Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 848th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the immense pleasure and privilege today of being your MC for a conversation with Rebecca Solnit, Thelma Young Lutunatabua, and Reverend Dr. Donna Schaper. We're thrilled to welcome poet Anselm Berrigan here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. And here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from. And now to introduce today's guests and host. Rebecca Solnit is the author of more than 20 books, including Orwell's Roses, Men Explain Things to Me, and A Field Guide to Getting Lost, among many others. A longtime climate and human rights activist, she serves on the board of the climate group Oil Change International and the advisory boards of Dayenu and Third Act. Thelma Young Lutunatabua is a digital storyteller and activist. She's the co-founder of Not Too Late. She currently works at the Solutions Project. Before that, she's worked in various roles supporting the global climate movement, as well as other human rights endeavors around the world. She calls Fiji and Texas home. And our host today, community builder Reverend Dr. Donna Schaper, served as senior minister for the Judson Memorial Church from 2006 to 2021. As an elder, she is passionately concerned about leaving the next generation well prepared for all they have to face. She's written over 35 books, and we're lucky to have her as an editor-at-large here at the Brooklyn Rail. And I'm so thrilled to have you all here today on the NSE. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Donna.
Good morning. Can you hear me? All right. In the name of the firefly, in the name of bioluminescence, in the name of all that is good, let's go. First of all, to my guests, congratulations so much, Thelma and Rebecca, on this great book, which has a great title, which is Not Too Late, and it should have been written in 1975, but what are you going to do? Here we are. Here we are. I'm just so happy to have you with us on what we call the Brooklyn Trail, a kind of spiritually and politically oriented version of the Brooklyn Rail, which, as we know, does great work on all of those fronts and a few more. Our time together today, I guarantee you will be hopeful. And so I'm going to begin by just reading a few sentences that I really treasured from the book, and my guests will comment on them as we go along. They define an emergency so well: when a so-called stable situation destabilizes. Destabilized, I think we know what that means. Hope is an axe, and that's going to be my first question, a breaking down before you can build up. And the real problem is sometimes with the environment and everything else that good people do nothing and complain about all the bad the other people are doing. To know the powerful is to know their weaknesses. To change the I can't do anything about it to we can do something about it. Change that I to a we. And look at all the good things that have happened locally. And I know Thelma wants to start with a cavell. Some of you know that word. It's one of those ways you brag about good stuff, usually your grandchildren. But let's brag about some good stuff as a starter. Thelma, why don't you go first?
Yeah, it's so important to remember in the climate space that we have the solutions already exist, whether you're wanting to look at policy or even technology or how do we live in balance and harmony with the planet, the solutions already exist. And so it's so important to not lose track of that. We have everything that we need. What's missing is just political will. Some of the great things that are happening with my work with the Solutions Project, I work with frontline grassroots organizations across the United States who are doing incredible things and showing powerful models that can exist. One amazing group is New Alpha CDC. They're based in South Carolina in a historically Black community. They just opened the South's very first environmental justice training institute, where they're training people on everything from regenerative farming. They have hydro panels on site where they're able to take water from the air and turn it into drinking water. They're teaching people how to be solar engineers. They're building up this amazing community resistance. So there's incredible models of how we can be in community, how we can create solutions that don't just have a veneer of climate friendliness, but have deep roots in actually building real change. There's so much amazing change that's happening from what is often seen as the periphery. I live in the Pacific as well, and another amazing example recently is in Vanuatu, when a group of young law students from the University of the South Pacific in Vanuatu were trying to figure out what they could do to tackle the climate crisis. And they came up with an approach about how they can get the International Court of Justice involved. And so they went up and built this amazing campaign, bringing in the government of Vanuatu, bringing in then 100, like I think it was 130 governments as well co-signed this. And they were able then to lobby the International Court of Justice to make an opinion on climate change as a legal issue. And with that, then they're able to impact a lot of active legal cases that are happening all around the world on climate. And so it again began from just a group of students on the island of Vanuatu trying to figure out what they could do. And then it went up to the biggest international court with governments all around the world applauding it. And so whether you're just trying to impact and support your community or whether you're trying to change the world, there's people who are doing it. And what Donna, what you said, it's like, how do we change the I to the we? Rebecca and I love to quote our friend Bill McKibben, and someone once asked Bill, what is the best thing an individual can do to fight the climate crisis? And Bill's response was, stop acting like an individual. And that's such an important mindset, is we create change when we act together. And it's not about one person taking one action. To create the level of change we need, it takes real community and real cooperation.
Thank you. Rebecca, how about you? What would you like to brag about, be happy about?
And one of the things that's really struck me the last few months is how many more victories there are than I know about. There was a point when the climate movement was pretty small and I felt like I was tracking it and I kind of knew what was going on. And I keep meeting people or just randomly coming across a news story and it's like, oh my God, that's happening too. Oh my God, that campaign is amazing. I was at a Buddhist climate retreat a couple of months ago. And there was this moment I was walking down the road with a bunch of women and I realized, like, wow, I'm walking down the road with the Great Bear Rainforest Protection. I'm walking down the street with the Paris Climate Treaty. I'm walking down, it was actually a rural road, with the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm walking down the road with, and the Green New Deal. I was just walking with all these people who'd been involved in all these extraordinary things. And there's so many, it's such an interesting balancing act to live in this moment. There's a lot of bad news about the physical condition of the planet, and with Not Too Late, we're never denying that. There's a lot of good news, both about the solutions, that sort of practical solutions, as Thelma's identified, about the growth of the climate movement in power, sophistication, victories, intersectionality. And I think beyond all that, there's been all my life, I'm 62, a subtle cultural shift in the industrialized world. The values of the world I was born into, which was so unequal in terms of race, gender, sexual orientation, able-bodiedness, so many other things. We have how we related to nature or didn't. I'm a year older than the book Silent Spring, which really began a lot of Americans beginning to recognize that it's all interconnected and you can't tinker with this without impacting that. And so, I feel like we're in the midst of a great cultural revolution. And Thelma's great subtitle for our book, Changing the Story from Despair to Possibility, is really about the fact that we live in stories and we have to change the stories as part of changing what's possible. How we see the world is how we can make the world. And I see that the stories have changed so much about what constitutes well-being, what constitutes who matters, who should be listened to, and land acknowledgements in all their imperfection. Speaking as somebody on Ramaytush Ohlone land right now, who grew up across the Golden Gate Bridge on Coast Miwok land, I was on until really late last night, would have been inconceivable 20 or 30 years ago. And so one of the things I like to talk about is you have to be slower than change to see change. And I'm kind of slow in a lot of ways, and that I see time in big increments, and I just see profound change happening in so many ways. It's obviously not nearly enough, but I also always want people to look at the situation as it's not that we're starting from scratch, that tomorrow we plant the seeds. The seeds have been planted. We have what we need. How do we water those seeds? How do we make them grow? How do we weed the plot? How do we look forward to the harvest?
Thank you. One of the facts that was interesting to me that you quote in the book is the cost of solar dropped 90% between 2010 and 2020.
You know, oh, sorry.
Oh, please.
Yeah, that's one of the ways where like long-term perspectives are crucial. I often see graphs and news items about how like the cost of solar or wind or its implementation has increased X amount in the last year or something. And it looks every year looks pretty good for more renewables that work better, that are more widely implemented. But if you look at where we were 20 years ago, it's astonishing. Essentially, at the turn of the millennium, we did not really have a viable alternative to fossil fuel. Wind and solar were expensive, primitive, utterly inadequate technologies. We've had an energy revolution that's so invisible because it's been slow and incremental and super technical, but it gives us the capacity to stop burning things to produce electricity and to change the world. We don't just need technical change. I don't think we'll implement that technical change unless we also change how we think about the world, or we won't change it adequately. I think one of some of the powerful new ideas are actually old indigenous ideas. We need to be people who make decisions based on what benefits the whole rather than what's most advantageous to me. I think this is a deeper way where what Thelma cited about thinking as a community rather than an individual matters. But we have had this incredible energy revolution and it keeps getting better. Some of the good news in the last couple of days is Toyota says they have a solid state battery that will hold a lot more charge. And there's also a lot of ruckus right now about the materials that go into batteries for electric cars and stuff. There's a revolution happening in battery materials. Yeah, we need to mine lithium and cobalt right now. That may not be the case in 10 years. Where I believe, and it took me a while to realize this, we're at the beginning of that revolution, not that it already happened and now we're just harvesting it. That more seeds are being planted, more stuff is growing all the time.
Nice, nice. And I began with the definition you use of what an emergency is when things destabilize. And then you say that you use a metaphor for hope, that it's an axe, which is something you'd use to break down doors within an emergency. I was just so startled and in love with that emergency metaphor, and almost made nervous by it too, axe. So talk to me about that. Who came up with that? How do you work together? What do you mean by hope being like an axe?
Well, that's a phrase from my book 20 years ago, Hope in the Dark, when I started talking about hope for activists. And
Mhm,
it's an axe, it's like a firefighter's axe where you need to break open the door to escape the fire,
mhm,
which we do because climate change is billions of little fires in our cars and our stoves and our power plants overheating the planet. And and it's a powerful metaphor, I think, because we often think of breaking something as destruction, but the firefighter doesn't hate the door. He's not violent. He's not trying to destroy anything. He's trying to change the circumstances so life can, or she is. I know a bunch of female firefighters here in San Francisco, one right up the hill from me.
mhm,
Um, so that we can continue to live. But I also coined that metaphor because there's often a sense that hope is either feeling good, and you can feel terrible. You can be in mourning, you can be in grief, you can have depression, and still be ferociously hopeful. A lot of people in frontlines communities are really hopeful because the alternative is to just surrender to direct and immediate destruction of themselves, their families, everything they love. Hope is Thelma and I both love the two wonderful quotes. Mariam Kaba, the anti-prison activist, saying hope is a discipline, and Václav Havel, who helped topple the Soviet satellite authoritarian regime in Czechoslovakia in 1989 after decades of risk on his part, said hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something is worth doing no matter how it turns out. So hope is not confidence in the future, which is optimism. I always say optimism, pessimism, and despair all assume they know what's going to happen. Hope is about uncertainty. We're acting partly because we know we're making the future in the present. We don't know how it will turn out, but we know what we do is part of how it will turn out. I think there's a lot of, in the United States, people really thinking somebody else is making all the choices and we're going to sit back and watch and we're going to cheer or complain or something, but not that it's up to us to do it. Or often people speak as though the future has already been decided. And there's a bunch of stuff that's true with climate. It's baked in, there's a certain amount of climate change is already here, a certain amount more is already baked in. But the difference between the best case scenario and the worst case scenario for what happens, which is what we're deciding in this decade, is colossal for the survival of a lot of people, a lot of places, a lot of species, a lot of systems. And now I will turn off my phone,
mhm.
and that might be a signal. That was enough of a tirade from me.
It wasn't a tirade at all. Thank you. Uh, Thelma, how about you? How do you look at hope and optimism and pessimism and the whole range of subjects inside the acts?
Yeah. And Rebecca's right. And the quote from Mariam Kaba that hope is a discipline is exactly on point. Hope is a practice that you have to build up. It's something I've had to build up in my life as a climate activist. I first started working full-time as part of climate organizations in 2014 after the People's Climate March. And for many, many years, my job was to look at the climate news, what was going on in the world, and figuring out how do we then take that and then disperse it to a large amount of people. So every day I was going through the climate news and it was getting so overwhelming, so heartbreaking. And I had to figure out my own practice of hope. How do I keep on going? For us, we don't want to dismiss grief. We don't want to dismiss anxiety. We don't want to dismiss the pain that is happening. What we don't want is for people to just stop there. It's the question of how do I live with this grief, this pain, and anxiety, but keep on going and keep on working and keep on acting. So I've had to build up a practice of a hope, and it's everything from finding the right articles and the right information, being aware of your information diet. Are you just reading apocalyptic headlines? What often happens, what I often found, is there would be a big apocalyptic headline, and then once you scroll to the bottom of the article, there'd be a small paragraph from that quoted a scientist, and the scientist would say, but there's still time to act. We still have space to take action. And that was often not seen. So Are you also looking for stories of solutions? Are you also looking for stories of the good things that are happening? Being aware of your information diet is really so crucial. Are you not just looking at dystopia, but are you also looking at possibilities and what is out there with the imagination of what we could build? Building a practice of hope also is about taking action. For me, if ever I was really feeling the grief of the climate crisis, I would go be with people. I would go and be a part of an action training. I would go be with other people who were, organizing a protest or a march, or people who were just organizing community mutual aid to support their community after a disaster. Going out and being with other people and taking action is one of the best ways for me that I've been able to build a practice of hope.
Mhm.
So practice of hope is keeping your imagination alive, keeping your feet moving, keeping your body moving with your community so that you are not frozen in place by fear, but you know that there's space for activity and you're continually moving and growing. And so having that awareness of I'm in pain, I'm frustrated, I'm anxious, doing what you need to nurse that, and then doing what you need to do to move onwards, to keep on going, because hope is also a luxury in a lot of ways. A couple years ago, I was in the Philippines interviewing the amazing climate leader there, Liddy Natchbill, and I asked her what brings her hope, and she just looked at me and she said, some days I don't have hope, but what option do I have to not fight, to not keep on working on this? I think especially for a lot of communities, sticking around and staying in your grief and pain is a luxury. And so it's so important that we have to keep on fighting. There's no option but to keep on fighting and keep on moving. And so doing what you need to do that is absolutely crucial.
I love that. I mean, speaking as a pastor, I think it's so easy to judge people for their sadness or their depression or their whatever, anxiety. Oh, why are you so anxious? When what really needs to be said is, do you give yourself permission to be less anxious or depressed? And how do you swim with the others who aren't there? And the Havla, the quote about "you do it because it's the right thing to do" from Václav Havel it's so aesthetic. I do it because it's beautiful.
It's a
I
good
don't.
way to live. Yeah.
It's a good way to live. It beats sitting around watching TV and what's the right word? Binging on bad news.
Can I jump in for a second?
Absolutely.
I want to say one of the things I think Thelma and I agree on is that a lot of the difficult emotion around climate, in a way, we read as a good sign. It means you care. The most dangerous thing out here is not grief. Grief means you care. And grief as caring means you're ready to engage if you see that there are possibilities. And,
Mhm.
indifference, is the real trouble, or being checked out, not even bothering to pay attention. And I think some people check out as a form of self-protection, partly because they think there's nothing we can do. And we did this book because there's so many myths out there. Nobody cares, nobody's doing anything, it's too late, we don't have the solutions, we're doomed. We think of that partly as bad facts, but also bad frameworks about the nature of change, the nature of power, what it takes to see how change works, what it looks like.
Mhm.
It's not always going to be we demand something on Tuesday and the powers that be fall to their knees and give it to us exactly as we ordered it on Wednesday. And we trace the way that a lot of things happen slowly, unpredictably, often had positive indirect consequences. So so that
Mhm.
growth of understanding, I think, really matters. And I think grief is a good beginning point, because it means you're not okay with how things are, but it's only the beginning point. Like, I'm not okay with the destruction of this forest, so let's become a forest protector. Let's figure out who's doing something to protect the forest, or
Mhm.
build something in this community, or file a lawsuit, or help people see how this forest matters and what this forest is doing intact, that it's not going to do as lumber. And,
Mhm.
and I also think that hope is very attached, inseparable from memory, that amnesia breeds despair. I think that we're in a culture without a lot of intergenerational relationships. And Thelma has moved to Fiji, where I think there's a lot more. But I think that intergeneration, but knowing the past either as somebody who just pays attention to history, somebody to listens to the stories of people who've done things, somebody who sees long increments of time, means knowing we have a lot of progressive victories. The world is not a stable place. It's always it's always changing. I think with amnesia, you imagine that the world has been stable and now it's suddenly destabilized, but it's never been stable. And a lot of the changes have been for the better. A lot of the good things have come about because of grassroots struggles, citizens' movements, small groups of organizers, whether it's the abolition of slavery, rights for queer people, indigenous rights that mushroomed into something much bigger. So seeing those templates, understanding the nature of change, being able to follow something like the Vanuatu victory, which took 4 years, the victory that Thelma opened with, is beginning to see how these things work.
Mhm.
And so grief is a, maybe not an encouraging beginning, but it's a good beginning. It's a terrible endpoint. And as I said before, you can feel both hopeful and devastated. And and also I think there's just a kind of fierce stubbornness that I think the fossil fuel industry and the people who support it would like us to feel powerless, would like us to give up, would like us to let them run everything. And the hell I'm going to do that. Don't surrender. Don't be who they want you to be. Don't buy into the idea that all you are is a consumer who can recycle and, make good dietary choices. Remember, you're a citizen, whatever your citizenship status, you're a citizen of Earth.
Oh,
You have power together. You have,
mhm.
you are the kind of person who can change the world. And
Mhm.
and that you don't need to change yourself the way that we all need to change the fossil fuel industry and the whole system.
Yeah, you could have rewritten that. That's really the new Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did the 4 stages of grief, and now there's a ton of new research on complex grief, that there's a 5th stage in grief, and it's the making of meaning out of it, and the getting to your anger and getting to your community of anger. And it's very interesting. And the idea that you can't be devastated and hopeful at the same time makes no sense to the average human being. We know about that.
But it's funny because I think the categories we think in, including the idea that hope is feeling happy or confident, I think really, I think a lot of what we're talking about is what are the frameworks we bring to the situation? How do we change the story? How do we see ourselves as powerful instead of fragile? How do we see ourselves as part of, as interconnected rather than isolated? How do
Mhm,
we see ourselves living in a process of constant change we can influence
mhm,
rather than in stasis or without the capacity to influence? So
mhm,
the frameworks are everything. We make ourselves powerful or powerless with stories. And actually, we brought in somebody you probably know, Roshi Joan Halifax, who talks a lot about post-traumatic growth, about how difficulty and suffering is often how we learn. And she's a Buddhist, so suffering is a given. What we do with it is where we have power and choice, and we can do remarkable things with it.
mhm. Yes, yes. I've been watching the end of American innocence in real life human beings for a long time. And it's a beautiful thing to see as we rewrite our history. And I think that the important part of your title has to do with changing the story. And I'm seeing you do it. So keep it up. Let us do it together. And I'm trying to get the capitalist slogan right about past performance does not guarantee future rewards, or something like that, that they put on when you invest in a stock. And that is a way of saying that just because all these things happened like this, that doesn't mean they're going to keep happening like this. And that is a sign of human maturity, that you can imagine a different outcome if you plug in different things. And if you plug in a different story about climate change, the human can actually become the hero of its own story. And if you plug in the despair, it's self-breeding, as it were, the devolution of the human. Interesting.
And chime in from that. A lot of this book, there's a whole section on addressing how we're in an imagination crisis, like what you're saying. One of my favorite pieces of the book is an interview that we did with Adrienne Maree Brown, when she talks about how we can use our imagination as a tool of liberation, and what could happen if we really start opening up our ideas about the pathways that are possible. And so I think it is absolutely crucial. It's there's been research that's been done recently about how Hollywood is talking about climate change. Well, first off, only 2% of all TV and film even mentions climate change. And then the majority of ones that do are very dystopian. They are very much so apocalyptic. These are the terrible things that are going to happen. And I'd love to ask people, what could happen if we win? What could things look like if we had beautiful possibilities? There's so much to learn from with Black futurism, Indigenous futurism. And if you're ever feel like you're in an imagination crisis, there's amazing books from authors on those topics that you can search for. But it's so important to see the road that can be built. And at the same time, recognizing, like Rebecca's saying, the future is not written. We don't know what's going to happen. And in that is possibility, and is exciting as well as terrifying. And so you have to keep on going each day, knowing that, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that I'm going to keep putting my foot forward and forward and forward, and trying to find the pathway that could lead to the best outcome for the best number of people.
Okay, wild and crazy question for you, Thelma. How old is your child?
My baby is 7 months, and so I was pregnant when I put this book together with Rebecca, which was very interesting, doing a book on climate hope while pregnant. And the final essay in the book is actually my experience with how I didn't really understand hope until I had a miscarriage, and what that process of having to pick myself up and keep on going despite that pain, what that taught me. My husband has been a leader with the Pacific Climate Warriors for many years, and their slogan is, "We're not drowning, we're fighting." And we kind of took that slogan and applied it to our process of building our family of, we're not drowning, we're fighting. We're not going to drown in our sorrow. We're going to keep on going, and trying to center that. And I don't think I really understood like the discipline that hope is until I had experienced that intense loss. And then we were able to have a baby, and then the baby's been a part of the book, and then the whole book tour as well.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I have 3 grown children and 5 grandchildren, and I love to talk with them about how beautiful their future is going to be. And they give me a lot of pushback, but I'm just trying to exercise my imagination, hope muscles. Because what a story it will be if we actually come through this shit. What a story it will be.
And I'm old enough to remember what the status of women was. Well, partly I know it at secondhand because I wasn't paying attention when I was born. But the world I was born into was so brutal for people of my gender. To be queer was to be treated as mentally ill or criminal or both. And so queer people had to hide themselves, racial inequality, gender inequality, the exclusion of people with disabilities were all completely normalized. The Ivy Leagues didn't admit women. Segregation was everywhere. The idea of female Supreme Court justices, female senators, et cetera, was barely on the horizon. A lot of the inequalities, you can't change things. I always say the diagnosis is the beginning of cure. So many forms of inequality, like the inequality built into how marriage was imagined,
Mhm.
weren't even acknowledged and discussed. They were just so normal and ancient. And so I feel like the world has gotten so much better in so many ways, so much more equal. We're so much less tolerant of injustice and inequality. There was no environmental imagination for the majority of people in the industrialized world. You just like dumped all your toxins right into the river. You chopped stuff down and burned it up and threw the chemicals around without forethought. So I feel like we've already lived through so much good change, and a lot, you don't have to be as old as me or spend as much time looking at the historical record to remember marriage equality and a lot of other things that have happened. And what the right is doing right now is pushback because they're absolutely terrified that they're becoming an embattled minority, which is
Mhm.
why they're fighting so hard to overthrow democracy itself, because because they recognize only through minority rule can they continue to be successful, powerful, and determinative.
Mhm.
So I take a lot of encouragement. A word a writer friend of mine reminded me means to instill courage from the historical record, from how much things have changed. And of course, while we've passed a lot of environmental protection and learned a lot about the environment, the corporations have continued to rule, and the fossil fuel has continued to be burned, the plastics have continued to be proliferating everywhere. Things have in many ways gotten worse, but also because of um, other legislation, of legislation, laws, practices have also gotten better in many ways. So, but I take it, so that's where historical memory gives me, and just long memory, even when I was a young woman, so many forms of misogyny and abuse, homophobia, mockery of anybody who wasn't a straight, white, able-bodied male were so normal. You watch movies, listen to songs if you're older that you remembered liking fondly. I had that happen with Purple Rain, which is, a terrible movie and how it treats women. And those are markers of change. Things have changed so much.
Mhm. Mhm. I think you're so right. I mean, no, a lesser sage, as you put in the book, than Slobodan Milosevic said, if people withdraw their support, the ruler cannot rule. And withdrawing consent to the powerful to hurt you. In my first marriage, I couldn't get my husband to clean up his clothes when he took a shower. The socks would be all over the floor, the clothes would be all over the floor. And when I stopped picking up the socks, he started picking them up, which has been a major learning for me. And I know it's trite, but if we withdraw support to the consensus that the powerful will always do bad stuff with our world, it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference. And
Yeah.
that's what you're talking about with the women's movement, the queer movements. So many things have happened.
And change so often happens in tiny increments. You look at the public decisions like marriage equality in the Supreme
Right.
Court 8 years ago, the much better Supreme Court than the completely corrupt one now. But why did the Supreme Court think it was obvious that same-sex couples should be equal when they'd made a very different decision in 2003? I think it's because of millions of acts of individual courage of queer people coming out of the closet, saying, we are here, we are your family, your friends, your coworkers, your colleagues, your neighbors. We deserve equal access. And of course, I think feminists changed the definition of marriage as a freely negotiated relationship between equals. And part of the fight against marriage equality is that conservatives want marriage to be a hierarchical relationship of domination. And if two men or two women can enter into into marriage, then marriage is not inherently unequal, and women don't have to be subordinate. We liberate each other. Liberation is contagious, so is its opposite. But I think that those tiny gestures of people changing how they think, changing how they raise their kids, not picking up the goddamn socks, uh, um, standing up for something, doing something different also matters. And I don't want to, and I think with climate, we're often told all we can do is personal consumption habits, and that's wrong. But I think talking about climate, making climate an issue and how we vote, what we talk about, what we recognize, what we read, how we think about the world, is part of it too. And
Mhm. All
awesome.
right, I'm seeing we have maybe 10 more minutes. Is there anything that is coming to you as you see these 300 or so lovely Brooklyn Rail people that you think we could do, think, say, imagine? Get a little Brooklyn for us. I know you like Brooklyn. Who doesn't?
And my mom was born there but raised in Queens. At Thelma, I just yammered for a while.
Well, I want to also go back a little bit. So you quoted before OT4, who were an anti-dictatorship movement to fight against Slobodan Milosevic. And then they've been an amazing force in training other groups in anti-dictatorship movements. And the climate movement right now is taking a lot of strategy from anti-dictatorship movements in the past, which is amazing. So what we need to do is tackle the pillars of support of the fossil fuel industry. So that's tackling their social license. So if you see, there's been a lot of movements, if a museum is having a sponsorship from BP or some other big oil company, there's been movements to remove them as sponsors. They do not deserve having that social license of the public persona. So people are fighting on the social license. They're fighting so many legal battles in court right now. There's financial fights. How do we remove all the financial backings that support pipelines? So there's all these different pillars of support that are propping up the industry right now. And we need to knock down those different pillars. And if we knock down the pillars, then they'll fall. That is classic anti-dictatorship strategy. So if you're looking for things to do, it's so important to think about which pillar can I help knock down? And so, there's a lot of, you can go to Stop the Money Pipeline. They are fighting to stop the financial flows that are supporting the fossil fuel industry. You can also look at a New York level. There's some really great legislation that's trying to get passed that'll help New York have better climate policies. I highly recommend the group New York Renews. They're amazing, and really, if you want to dig into the policy side in New York on climate, they're doing really great stuff. Sorry. You have the most power on a local level. So, look at, any museums, any institutions in Brooklyn. Are they taking money from the fossil fuel industry? Could you help organize to take it down? And then also, it's so important to support organizations like Frontline Groups who have been doing the work. One of my favorite groups out there who also helps me see the possibility is Uprose. They're based in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. They're doing amazing work to help build a just transition in Brooklyn. They've gotten permission and working with the city and other players to build a big solar park in Sunset Park that will then bring solar power to the community. They're building, bringing in more jobs that will then build offshore wind. And so they're thinking about how to have a transition in Brooklyn that's not just green and renewable, but also supports the local community. So if you want to learn more or just offer your support, Uprose is amazing. But yeah, find groups who are already doing good work and just get involved. Offer your talents. Everyone has a talent that can be contributed, whether you're a graphic designer or maybe you are really great at press releases, or whatever your skill is, bring that skill forward. And maybe actually now's the time where we can show artwork. Eleanor, if you're able to bring forward the art. Rebecca's amazing brother David is a brilliant artist who's been helping to make art for the climate movement for ages, and not just make art, but he encourages everyone to make art. He sees art as an organizing tool, and he made some amazing posters that then get screen printed for the book, that are each of the different headings for the book that he's made. So David's talent is art. I don't know, Rebecca, if you want to say anything more about the art pieces.
The Swiss Army knife one I love, because it's about, we have the equipment. It's for the last section of the book. We really tried to make a compact, really accessible book that would cover a lot of what you need to know about climate if you're a newcomer, but that will like maybe renew your hope if you're an old timer. And the last section is take this with you. We felt like we were equipping people. We don't just want them to feel hopeful, and this is, in the passive way, this is what the hope is in acts. We want them to feel hopeful so they engage, so that you all find your place in the climate movement, because this is the decade of decision. And I love that David created all these tools for building, for digging, for growing, for changing, and also I think for opening a wine bottle. And with this one, and because we think of the book, we think of a lot of what we're trying to give people as a toolkit, and a toolkit isn't just a treasure, it's stuff you use, and ideas are as good as what you do with them, and frameworks are as valuable as how you implement them in your life. And climate is everybody's job, and as Thelma says, everybody has something to do, and I felt that's part of what I think the art is about, is looking at the breadth of what is happening, what needs to happen. And here's a heart and a windmill, that the emotional and the practical are connected, that action and imagination are connected. So, yeah, and David's kind of how I became an activist. And back when he was really young, and he would always volunteer for stuff and then call me up and say, "Hey, I volunteered to do the newsletter." And I was then working as an editor. I'm a pretty good copy editor, and everyone knows like words are what I do. And I'd be like, "Okay, I'll be right over and help you like edit and lay out the newsletter." And
Right.
then I'd be like, okay, now I know why this matters and where the demonstration is, so I'm gonna go. And that was, God, so long ago. And he's been a remarkable activist and organizer, and was always creative and really found his niche. I think as a white guy, he wanted to step back a little bit from real leadership and just be a sort of facilitator, creating often art projects for movements that let the impacted communities, the local people, the constituency come in and make art together, learn skills, talk together, have a really good time, make demonstrations, not something where we listen to somebody telling us what to think, but where everybody's participating. So he does a lot of street murals and things too as part of it, working with the Poor People's Campaign and the Reverend Barber and the Coalition of Immokalee Workers and other groups, as well as the climate movement. Okay, that was enough plugging my brother.
Anybody else? Did you want to plug any co-worker or sibling?
I think we should talk just about this book. Has more than 20 contributors. They're from all over the world, from Bangladesh, from Fiji, from Guam, from New Mexico, from New Orleans, from Maine, from California, from from Australia. We have climate scientists, some of the top climate scientists in the world, talking about their hopeful visions. We have organizers, we have frontline communities members, we have people like Adrienne Maree Brown and Roshi Joan Halifax, who really address what is the inner life of our hearts and souls and imaginations that we bring to a situation like this. What is the equipment to face it and be powerful in the face of it? So we really wanted to have a diversity of voices in terms of what their relationship to climate is, what their toolbox is, where they are in the world, literally, what their piece of the movement is, because it couldn't just be us. And we're really, we call it our dream team. Everyone we asked said yes.
Mm,
And
nice.
some of them are people like our friend Red Constantino from the Philippines, who've already changed the world in huge ways. He was part of the fight during the Paris Climate Treaty to set the threshold at 1.5 degrees instead of 2 degrees, which is huge for the climate vulnerable nations. A lot of them, it's a difference between going underwater or dying of heat and surviving. And it was a battle people told them they couldn't win, and they won it. So he wrote a piece for us called How the Ants Move the Elephants in Paris. And so yeah, but there's so many good people out there. And I think something Thelma said, and one of the commenters in the chat said I saw, like, don't doom school. There's a lot of not very well informed people spreading doom and dismay. The mainstream media is often making dramatic, despair-inducing, misleading stories out of often the news is bad, but it doesn't mean that it's too late or there's nothing we can do. As Thelma said, if you read deeper, if you find good news sources, whether you're following climate scientists on Twitter or following great climate groups, there's deeper ways to look at this, both in terms of frameworks and facts and news. And that's part of your toolbox for being present without being defeated in this crisis.
And it really does model a way, form follows function in your book, The Many Voices, as you as co-editors of it. It goes to we instead of I. And I think that we're going to move to some questions for the group at this point. What do you think, Eleanor?
Yes, I think that it's a perfect time. We got so many amazing questions from the audience, and a huge, huge thank you to Rebecca and Thelma and Donna for this amazing conversation. It's been so inspiring and informative. The first question I'm going to read on behalf of Tala. Tala wrote, what can be done about the private sector groups affiliated with the World Economic Forum who play on, quote, sustainability, but it's really about the extraction and containment of indigenous, global South, and low income / middle income communities and their resources and livelihoods, such as food security.
Thelma?
Well, I think calling out greenwashing is important. I think one great thing that Greta Thunberg has done is calling out greenwashing. And so don't buy into things that sound nice and research them. I think another key thing is showing additional models of economies, of ways of being. I think in that way, it's so important to especially look towards indigenous communities around the world who have, such a deep understanding of how not just to be in nature, but how to have different models of economies, different ways that we can exist together. And so showcasing those, researching those, supporting those, helping them come to life in imaginative ways, that's really important, because the world model that the whole Davos crew is proposing is not the only way that we have to exist.
I would just add, there's a great slogan that delay is the new denial. One of the things that I think we run into a lot in the climate sphere is that a lot of people don't always have the up-to-date frameworks. Climate denial, like there's idiots all over Twitter or bots or, pushing it. But what you see now is that a lot of corporations and powerful people know that outright denial doesn't work it strategically anymore, for them at least. And so they're always claiming to be, in a way, I'd rather have an honest enemy than a dishonest friend. So they're pretending to be on board with it, but they're proposing things that aren't solutions, like carbon sequestration, as ways to not do what we know we need to do, which is to essentially shut down the fossil fuel industry, stop extraction and burning of fossil fuel, make a swift and just transition to renewables world, and that it needs to be done with the participation of the most impacted people. You have people like Bill Gates who clearly want a world with centralized power and profit and top-down decision making. And so democracy is part of the solution. The impacted people, and have to be participants. One of the beautiful things about the energy solution is that it's literally decentralized. Sun and wind is spread across the globe. You're not going to have oil superpowers like Texas and Saudi Arabia, who can have a lot of political clout because they have fossil fuel. There's every country will more or less have energy independence or a great degree of it. It will change geopolitics for the better. So I think watching out for false solutions and and delay is really important. You'll also see a lot of moderates, including a lot of Democrats, who are like, I'm totally on board with climate. Let's take these tiny baby steps when we need to be making leaps. And so delay is the new denial. So it's really about being informed enough to counter bad agendas and bad frameworks with good information. And if you're just a regular individual paying attention to what good climate groups and organizers and experts are saying and amplifying those signals.
Amazing. Thank you so much for those answers. And thank you for that great question. Our next question will be from Charles Olson, and I'm giving you the opportunity to unmute.
Thank you. I really love the way this conversation is going from the personal to the political. I think you guys are really doing a wonderful job with that. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about laws or regulatory frameworks that are actually impeding the changes that you're discussing. In New York State, we recently had a push to change zoning laws, and to open up zoning to make housing, to increase housing density in some communities, especially near transportation hubs, and it failed. And so obviously, there's a lot of push for local control of land, local control of women's bodies, things like that. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about any laws or regulatory frameworks that you think should be changed to facilitate the changes you're talking about. Thank you.
Gosh, that's kind of technical. What have you got, Thelma?
Utility companies. Utility companies across the US are some of the major blockers of green energy and some of the main supporters of bills that will continue to block the progress. There's a really great article that just came out today on this. So many utility companies across different states are monopolies. They do not want people to have control over their own energy. And so they're doing everything that they can to limit the spread of not just renewable energy, but community-owned renewable energy. So, I don't know the specifics of New York, but New York has some has some better climate laws than other states, but they're maybe not being enforced as well as they could. But lots of states are locked into fierce legal battles where the utility companies are kind of the dark figures behind the scenes. It's often not thought about as the villain in the room, but they're major villains. Though some utility companies, I will offer, are making positive steps, but the battle for energy is not just about electrifying everything, getting renewable energy, everything. It's about how do we democratize energy as well, so that people have control over their power. Otherwise, we're just going to replicate the same models where you have the same monopolies, the same extractive companies before, who can, turn off a community's power like this. And so being aware of those legal fights and who is actually behind the lobbyists is really crucial.
I'm just going to add something that's I just posted a New York Times link. They did a piece, Guess Who's Paying for, let me just get the title right. guess who's been paying to block green energy? You have, because your utility in many states and places is using income profit from ratepayers to fight the transition. But one thing I think I also often run into from people who haven't been involved in activism is the idea that change is happening at the federal level. There's so much change that's happening on the scale of one institution. Let's put solar on the roof of our high school and compost our trash and build a garden in the, I think turning football fields into gardens would be awesome as a person with an ambivalent relationship to gladiator sports. But there's hyper local levels like that. There's the scale of your town, your county, your state. There's also international treaties that I think people are aware of, but often there's a sense like if something bad happens on the federal level, and we see it happening with, like, I think 26 states have passed abortion protection rights because they're like, okay, the feds took away Roe versus Wade, but we can protect it on a state level. And you see, I was actually with my friend Eric Meebust, who works with a state senator in California, who's talking, I can't describe the specifics now, but an exciting new climate bill they're going to introduce that's could really change how California regulates and recognizes energy use and climate impact. And it's one of the fun things about being in an oversized state with 40 million people is a lot of times when we do something in relationship to climate and energy, it sets the template for the country. And you can see things often that start really small. In the city of Berkeley, one city councilwoman decided to pass a measure to block gas hookups in new construction. It passed the city of Berkeley. It's been challenged because of how it was written, but 50 California municipalities soon after that 2019 thing followed suit. So all these cities started banning new gas hookups, which is part of how we get fossil gas, also known as the methane, the deadly methane inside your house, out of new buildings. And then states started to look at passing it. New York failed to, but Washington State did. Other parts of the world looked at it and things like that. So, also I think change happens in ways like that. I'm sure people are like, oh, Berkeley, who cares? But change is often contagious and scales up. So looking at legislation that way is also good. Like maybe you're passing something in your city council that's going to become the template nationwide too.
Thank you so much for that great question, Charles, and for those amazing answers. Our next question will be from CRN. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to unmute. You should be able to unmute. Well, I'll just read their question.
Hi,
So
hello.
hi.
Hi,
Please.
sorry about that. Thank you for having this wonderful conversation. My name is Kieran Fitzgerald. I'm from Portland, Oregon. My question is, there are many scientists who claim we are in abrupt, irreversible climate change. Do you think the energy we put into hope should be put into honesty? Should we be focused on love and preparing for planetary hospice? Thank you so much.
I think there's kind of a false binary there. One of the things that's been really meaningful to me, the day after Hurricane Katrina and the levees that they knew would failed, and 80% of New Orleans went underwater. There was bumper to bumper traffic with boat trailers to get into the city or get near the city. Nobody thought they could save everybody. There were thousands of people, senior citizens, grandmothers, single moms with small children, sick people, poor people who couldn't afford to evacuate, stranded on freeway overpasses, rooftops, etc. Nobody thought they could save everyone. Everybody thought it was worth trying to see if they could save someone, not knowing what they were going to do. And that's what hope means to me. We're not going to save everything because the world before climate change is gone. We do have the power to save a lot if we act a lot. The difference between doing nothing and doing what we can is huge for when we don't know what it will look like, because the future takes place as it becomes the present. We're making the future in the present. So I'm that, for me, putting your boat in the water to rescue someone, not knowing whether you'll rescue one person or no one, or capsize and drown yourself. That's what hope looks like. It's not passive. It's not optimism that everything will be fine. It's not a delusion that you know what's going to happen. It's as the quotes we open with say, it's a commitment.
Yeah,
Thousands of people were saved in New Orleans because these people who often had to sneak around the authorities to get in there went in there and did what they could. And right now we all need to pull our boat trailers up to where the floods are.
yeah. And hope doesn't deny how horrifying things are right now. We are completely honest about how bad the situation is. We also don't want to stop people from taking action. The most recent IPCC report, which is created by the world scientists, their lead author even said, and I quote, "It's not too late." And this was just a couple months ago. Literally said it's not too late. There is space to act. And so often people think, oh, if we're going to go over 1.5 degrees Celsius, it's going to then, have the ripple effects from there. But what we need to be aware of is that every 10th of a degree of warming matters. And so that's why every action that we take matters, because it's so exponential that, and we don't know where we're going, but it's still possible. And there was even just an article that came out yesterday about how we can actually still stay under 1.5 if we do some more work to create more carbon sinks. And so I don't want to deny that things are horrible, and there's so many communities that are already having to adapt, and adaptation is underway. In Fiji, there are dozens of villages that are currently having to be relocated because of sea level rise. In the book, we have an interview with Kathy General-Kitchener, who's from the Marshall Islands, which is one of the atoll nations most at risk from going underwater. There's no denying that adaptation will have to happen. We've already locked in a scary amount of warming. What is crucial is not giving up, because every tiny fraction of warming matters.
I just want to add something that I think about a lot, which is I often feel that a lot of Americans speak like something really bad happens. The first thing you say is, my God, this is really bad. The Nazis have taken power. You've gotten cancer diagnosis. But you stick with it, and then it's like, well, what can I do under these circumstances? What are the treatments for my illness? What are the forms of resistance, and decency I can protect under a terrible regime? And so it's never, and it's interesting how, like, the bad news is bad, but that's a starting point, not a stopping point. And there's so much you can do. I know so many people. I've had a minor round of cancer. I know a lot of people who've had major rounds, and they kind of buckled down and went through the intense treatments. One of my close friends was saved by a brand new treatment that was emerging just after their diagnosis. You figure like the first round is just being really flattened by the bad news. And there's a funny thing that actually happens in the media a lot. There's a wonderful piece by Emily Atkin called The Wheel of First-Time Climate Dudes. In the media, periodically, somebody, usually a white guy, discovers that, who hasn't been paying attention, discovers that climate change is indeed very bad. And then he thinks it's his job to tell everyone how bad it is. And I think we all know how bad it is. We know what world we're living in. We've been living in it for a long time. And sometimes this happened in Harper's recently. Those of us who aren't running around every day saying, like, it's so bad, get trashed for not saying that. And it's like, we already know it's bad. Here's what we're doing about it. We're at a different point in the process. So there's a, so, 80% of New Orleans is underwater. Like, that's important to know. Now what should we do? Let's load up our boats and get in that water and see if we can get some grandmas and their grandbabies into the boat to dry land and clean clothes and hydration.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that question, Kieran, and for those really amazing answers. I think that's going to be all the questions we have time to take today. And apologies if you sent a question that we didn't get to. And thank you all for sending your questions. They've all been so great. We do have a tradition here at the Rail of concluding our events with a poetry reading. And today I'm so thrilled to welcome Anselm Berrigan to the stage. Anselm Berrigan is the poetry editor here at the Rail and is the author of a number of books of poems, most recently Pregrets from Black Square Editions. Thank you so much for being here, Anselm, and over to you.
Hi, thanks, Eleanor. Can y'all hear me? Thanks so much for that amazing conversation. And I will now do something slightly separate in texture, but related at the same time in some ways, maybe. This is untitled. The words get together in the early morning and decide on who they're going to fail that day. They pick people, the people who will go on to say, language failed me today. Still here for Paul and Sarah. Is it weird for Marx to be named Mark when someone says we mark the occasion? When you're named Anselm, this isn't something you think about, even if I am thinking about it now, if this is thinking. My apologies. I was going to start this in my mind by typing, I am reverting, but I don't know in what direction. Reverting in this instance may mean thinking about dying, not what you want. But I can't help the way this is going. I don't think you can really prepare for missing someone. And then you can. And then you can't. And then that absence, in order to be itself, is always something else. Corner I. The impetus of this poem has to do with cats inspecting the corners of rugs. Corner I. I too might inspect the corner of the carpet if I knew I could stash golden paper clips and random puzzle pieces between its surface and whatever that other shit below it is. Hi. I disagree with the writer who said on the Comic Book Resources website that the ability to fly by screaming really, really loud is inherently silly. I just typed something really dumb, but I came back to make sure I copped to doing so. A recent claims number is 190315882. Don't usually type poems on the computer. Just crossed out 5 lines about my health, or actually about my dislike of occupying medical habitats in the civic spheres. I asked a hip specialist how much it would hurt right after getting a hip replacement. It's really tempting to break out of the costume in that kind of extended temporary moment. He said it will feel like being kicked in the hip by a donkey, but the donkey will get smaller every day. You have a pretty good idea how hard it is to go on from here. I'm going to start teaching again the day after tomorrow. I have to preserve tomorrow as the day I get ready for teaching. The main thing to do is wake up and not trick yourself out of having a mind, or to give your mind a wide berth in order to function. That may be a way of recognizing mind, actually. Did you know the reader is always wrong? I don't know. I have subscribed to no philosophies. No philosophy has my credit card number. No auto pay. I know how this sounds, don't worry. The distortion is coming. Some kind of slash through, camo in public. I defended snakes on Twitter right before writing everything after the first dozen lines. I hate the relentless way this won't go anywhere but down. But by saying so, I become available to shedding hate. I'm having weird memory gaps, for me. I'm saying this both on and below this surface. I'm sorry if I don't always remember your name. The dumb thing said isn't in the poem. And then I'm just going to read something that is untitled and maybe still a little bit in progress. That last poem was the pre-surgery poem, and I did have a hip replacement surgery recently, and this is a little bit more of a post-surgery poem. I need a title. I liked getting addicted to doom as a possible title for something to write out of the conversation, but I don't think addicted to doom is the right title for this one. Okay. This dude I met on New Year's Day wants me to come down and read poems for him in Richmond, Virginia real soon. But I just had my right hip replaced, don't drive, and ain't working. Ain't works there being one beat. I'm sitting outside waiting to ask Charlotte if she's ever been to the Kentucky Derby, because she told me she was going in a dream. The dream was this morning, but also seemed to happen years ago, so maybe she's back. In this same dream, Barrett and me ended up in jail, but B escaped by putting on regular enough clothes and walking out the door. I left too, and he knew I was with him, but I started to realize other than for him, I wasn't there, which was good for being on the lam, but hard when we went to a thrift store with bookshelves where Mom was reading and she could see and hear me, but didn't believe I was me. Suddenly, I was at a party in my honor at a golden gymnasium. I had been released on my own recognizance back into visibility. Fong was there, gave me a hug and thanked me for my work on the October Railroad Earth. Miles Morales influenced this dream. I can't sleep on my side till my ceramic hip tells me I can, and that's been heavily dosing my dreams. Handsome Dick Manitoba just walked by in black tracksuit and cap. We talked here about being fathers one night, though he probably doesn't recall. They used to sell infants' wear, children's dresses, boys' suits, underwear, and novelties here. The outer wall tells you so. This is the longest I've been out without a cane in half a year. Sometimes I'd be limping down A in such bizarre and rotating arthritic pain, I'd pause to say, wow. I stopped going most places by March, other within a 3-block radius, except teaching out at Pratt. Can't say I dug it. My old therapist just walked by and asked after the family. I liked her, but had to cut out once her analogies in the narrative vein started to repeat. She's part of the fabric of the neighborhood, though, and it's good to see her and be seen by her, especially when I know I'm writing for the first time in ages, but being seen writing reinforces some version of surface that is me out and about writing. I would find that quasi-questionable if I weren't you. This poem must now absorb some interruptions. I have to check the progress of a mac and cheese delivery. Yoshiko, who is possibly the greatest being of all time, just walked by with a friend and some takeout. I keep missing her dance performances because of my bad hip, which is constantly improving, so I have to wean myself off of using bum hip as an excuse to be at minimum less than available. My linguistical instinct wants to say sorry to everybody, but really I should just apologize to myself. Dude dropped his receipt, kicked it, pretended not to notice. Is that really better than leaving dog shit on the sidewalk? Walking with a cane makes me realize my people are the people with canes. I started this notebook by writing my people roll with their canes, then I looked at that and wrote, well, maybe not roll. And so that couldn't go anywhere but here. My first cane was blue and black and foldy, but too short. My next one was red and foldy and closer to the right height, but I left it on the M14A select bus. These were drugstore bought for $20 each. I splurged on a classic, to me, top-hooked, deep brown wood cane for $30, and that's been solid, though it falls over a lot, and I have to ask strangers to pick it up if I'm not already low enough to the ground. I officially constantly wonder how many people have to do the fucked up cycle of hiding pain or proving pain, depending on the situation. I don't think I've had enough time to make any conclusions. I know I'm grateful to the folks who offered to let me sit on the subways and buses, even though sometimes sitting is harder than standing. Tom, the musician who was friends with Jim Carroll and Ten's bar here, worked for about a year with a shattered arm. This place was the only place for a while I could write in the depths of the early pandemic. Sit outside and take your time. Makes sense I'm able to write here. Last week, the air in town was the worst in the world, but only for a day. Typical NYC catastrophe lore. World Trade Center goes down. We're loved for 3 weeks and then an excuse for war forever. COVID starts wiping us out. Y'all making that shit up. Terrible air from Canada's terrible fires. It passed in a day. I'm pretty sure the world somewhat digs us, and a projection of 1/12 of the country hates us as a kind of mental leisure activity, which is extra scary to me because X millions of us in NYC area, which is like 35 million people when you go tri-state or do the corridor between here and Philadelphia, are from everywhere but here. A terrific reality TV show would be made of only New Yorkers, but only New Yorkers who are children of poets and painters. Me and Eddie, Marie and Max and Sophia, Vincent Katz, Ambrose Bye, Joseph Carey, Marcella. I'll excuse Wayne Padgett from this travesty. Who am I leaving out? How do we function? Why do people occasionally hire us? Why don't we apply to things? How many horrible, scarring things have our so-called children and peers, elders and peers said to us about whatever they thought they were talking about? What wayward souls are we ignoring and therefore consigning to messy semi-lives of pretend, if possibly justifiable, outrage? I'm afraid to name my own kids, and Ismail and Cerise, and okay, stop. Charlotte just came on shift. She's never been to the Kentucky Derby, but her friends inside the other night were talking about Cheetos and dreamed all night about eating Cheetos. Not my point. Keep going, I said. Thank you. Sorry if that was too long.
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much, Anselm. That was really, really incredible. I loved that last poem especially. And
Maybe I'll actually type it up.
that would be cool. And thank you again to Thelma and Rebecca and Donna for the wonderful conversation today. Thank you to the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program to make these daily conversations possible, and for supporting our archive, which you can view on our YouTube channel and where this conversation will be up shortly. For the past 22 years, the Rail has been a platform for the arts, culture, and politics in our free monthly publication and public events like our daily NSE, and our summer issue is out now, so please go to your local distributor to pick it up and check it out online. And check the chat for a link to donate to support the Rail. Join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Megan Whitko, Michelle White, Matt Dilling, and Charlotte Kent on the event of Chrissa and New York at Dia Chelsea. We will conclude with a poetry reading by Zephyr Lazowski. Thanks everyone for tuning in today, and you can now all turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much. Great to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Thelma.
Thank
Great
you.
question, Charles.
Thanks
Great
for all the
poem.
great work.
10 seconds.
Great work.
Thank you to the Rail too. It was fantastic.
Thank you for tuning in.